Tropic of Serpents, a memoir of Lady Trent, is number 2 in the Lady Trent fantasy series. This one is was written in 2014. These are a series of books where Lady Trent is looking back over her illustrious, scandalous, dangerous, outrageous, heroic career as a naturalist, and for the in this kind of a it's a fantasy world, which is basically it's Victorian. It's sort of set in a Victorian age, but it's an alternative Victorian age where there's dragons, and indeed the dragons seem to have maybe affected the history of this place, where it's still got very much the Moors. In the first book, Isabella Miss Camhurst, I think I'll call Mrs. Camhurst, was just a tag along to her husband's expedition to basically kind of Eastern Europe, I believe, to investigate the Draconis, the big dragons. And in this book, she's much more her own person. There's a kind of a starting plot of they figured out how to preserve dragon bones, because when you kill a dragon, the bones immediately dissolve. But they figured out how to preserve them, which is bad for the dragons because these bones are incredibly strong and incredibly light. And if anyone else figures out how to preserve them, they're going to probably just slaughter all the dragons and get all the bones, and they'll probably go extinct. So they're trying to come up with a way to synthesize it. And there seems to be other forces that are breaking in and grabbing stuff. This is all happens at the very beginning of the book. But they need to investigate more dragons to try and figure out how to make a synthetic material to replace actual dragon bones, because she loves dragons as a naturalist. She just wants to study them. She doesn't want them to be butchered and killed and used in kind of the early industrialization of kind of an early England. So they end up going to Ariga, which is it's Africa. It's Africa. Indeed, I think that at one point they go to what's basically Victoria Falls. They there to investigate the grass-dwelling snakes and the swamp dragons. Now the big thing to start off with this book is it's not actually a ton about dragons. Dragons are a part of this world, and indeed you got the cover of the book, which you probably can't see very well because it's mostly white, so it really blanks out. But there's like a dragon on the cover, so you're thinking, oh, this is like Dragons of Pern, we're going to be riding dragons and stuff like. No, this is an expedition. They get enmeshed in sort of the complicated politics. They learn all about the cultures there, the many different cultures. This isn't just Africans or Oregons. This is like all the different cultures. These are people who haven't come under the sway of the Scalia, which is basically it's the English Empire yet, or they haven't come under things. And there's just all this interesting, complicated politics. They go into the Green Hell, which is basically where the swamp dragons live, where there are peoples there who have their very own particular way of living. Stuff like the idea of personal property isn't something it's foreign to them. And the book does a really good job of kind of ethnographically going in there. And this, I like this book because it is written like a Victorian memoir of a naturalist who kind of goes into all these interesting details and is fascinated by dragons, but wants to tell you about all the other different things going along. And it's sort of a more enlightened, more intelligent writer. Each Rider Haggard book of like kind of an interesting, daring adventure, but it's actually not treating the natives people, the actual inhabitants of this thing, as savages. It's actually, no, these are intelligent human beings, and they've got their own ways, and they want their own self-determination. And there's a thing I like about this book. I just finished reading Fingersmith, and that's a book that really shows that, when Margaret Atwood writes her horrible dystopian futures and says, no, I took that all from like stuff that's either already happened or is happening, and people think, oh, the Middle East or something like that. It's like, no, I think she could also be Margaret Atwood. I bet some of this stuff is like Victorian England, where as a female you have no legal rights and stuff like that. So it's nice to kind of come into a fantasy world where it says, you know what, we're not going to imagine things are completely shitty for women, and that they're just going to be subjugated in this made-up world that I get to make up that has inspirations from the Victorian world. I'm going to imagine a world where a woman, and I mean, don't get me wrong, Victorian women were able to actually get out and do stuff on their own, so I won't take it away from that, but this is like a light fantasy world where, yes, the women get to do their own thing and fight against the men and actually succeed in a way that it's like, I like that. And just the idea of like, and I have the sense that we might be kind of coming to a thing here where dragons might affect the world enough that there's maybe even a chance that like all these fictional countries aren't going to come under the sway of this huge empire because of dragons. That can come in there. It's interesting listening to I listened to this on audio. It was narrated by Kate Redding, which was a nice itch to scratch because she narrates one of the narrators of Brandon Sanderson's The Way of King books. And there's sort of a very prim, proper kind of, slightly, we're this is all going to be PG, but also kind of fun kind of voice, which, jibes well. I can see why she got both jobs. But it's funny because at some point it mentions like, oh, and at this point Isabella is 23, and it's like, wow, she does not read like she's 23. She reads like this is like a 40-year-old or older woman. But then you have to remember that it's a memoir and it's elderly Lady Trent telling about her youthful, her very, second adventure when she was 23. But even so, I think maybe it's just because it's the Victorian kind of like, you're going to still sound old, even if you're 23 and like, if it was vernacular of today, I don't know. So I enjoyed this book. This was fun, but yes, you dragon lovers out there, there's not that much dragons in there. Now, if you're not a dragon lover and you kind of roll your eye at dragon books, but you like kind of Victorian-ish kind of that sort of stuff, and you like kind of ethnography and natural kind of that sort of thing, and a little bit of adventure going in. It is written in a very kind of Victorian kind of stately pace in a way. It was good to listen to it on audio. I mean, you can tell how stately it is because we do have a whole full chapter at the end to kind of wrap things up and to kind of maybe put the things down for what the next adventure is. And indeed, there are more books, and I will indeed be checking out the further adventures of Lady Trent because it's simply delightful. All right. More videos later.